The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal View.
And welcome everybody right here to the Paranormal View on the Paradox Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight. Those in the chat room and those listening from around the world. We appreciate each and every one of you. And tonight, if you do have questions, you can private chat them to either Ceiling Cat or myself, H. Foister, and we will get those answered for you. And if you're somewhere else other than here in the chat room, you can still send a question to theparanormalview@gmail.com. And we will get those all answered. Got a great show tonight lined up for the first show of the new year, and I hope everyone had a great Christmas and a great New Year's. And I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight. So with that, I have with us Barbara Duncan.
I am here.
And we got a great guest for the first one, first show of the new year. And he's not a new guest, but he's going to have a lot to talk about tonight. So, Barbara, you got anything before we introduce our guest?
No, just everybody, please keep Australia in the back of your minds and in your thoughts. And if you can, donate to their various charities that are going to Australia to help battle this huge fire that's going on there.
Yes, it's terrible. And Australia is not the only place that keeps having problems. No. We've been having stuff all over the United States here. So,
no, but over 500 million
animals
have lost their lives in this. It's massive.
Yeah, it sure is. I would say it's probably bigger than the one that was in California, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
This is 50 times, I think they said, the size of Los Angeles.
Oh, wow. Jeez. Yeah. That's big then.
Or 5 times. I can't remember which. It's huge. And pretty much all over Australia. So.
Yeah. And that's, they got a lot of like desert areas too. And it's, burning everywhere, even those places. So.
Yeah, people forget Australia is about the size of the United States. Forget the maps, which are totally drawn wrong. Australia and the United States are about the same size. Right. So, picture the entire coast of the United States on fire, and that's pretty much what you got.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, you want to introduce our guest?
Well, he doesn't need any introduction. He's Thomas Wertman, director of Ohio MUFON. And the man has so much knowledge on UFOs and technology. It's just amazing, and it's always wonderful to have him as a guest. So welcome, Thomas Wertman.
Wow, I'm getting a swelled head after that introduction. So much technical knowledge. You should see when I struggle at home on certain projects.
Well, we don't care that you can't fix a can opener. But you know how planes and UFOs work, and
oh yeah,
it's kind of more important.
Going back to the can opener, I may break it first before I fix it. But the thing is, it's a subject I really love, though. I've been into it since the 1960s. That's when I first started reading and stuff like that, and really got serious with the research back in 2008, 2009. As I always call it, entering my second childhood, or going through my change of life or something. I don't know what. But I really get into it, and I love to do it from the scientific point of view, because I can go on YouTube and see all these videos. I can go to different websites out there and, see all these stories. And since I've retired, I'm almost getting to the point now, Barbara, where I can tell you what time of day certain shows are on television. because as I'm doing projects around the house, I turn on the different shows. And I won't mention them by name, but there's tons of shows like everybody knows out there on UFOs and aliens and everything else. And I'll have those running in the background. And I think, Henry, you'd love to have a recorder running sometimes when I'm watching these shows.
Oh, Lord.
And you would have to cut out some of the colorful metaphors, of course, to put them on the air. But there's some shows out there that are extremely good, and there are some that are just, I want to say, why waste your time putting these shows together?
I believe you. I sit there and I'll start talking about them, and Patsy starts hollering at me.
Oh, I know, because, I mean, looking from the paranormal side where you come from, I mean, there's so many shows out there, and you're probably the same way.
Oh, yeah.
You get some great shows that you could tune in and watch, every episode that comes out. You get other ones where you're like, oh, wait a minute, this person is saying this crap?
I don't believe they're actually putting that on.
No, and I'm thinking, this person has to be getting paid to say that.
Yeah.
Seriously?
Well, if you have Amazon Prime and haven't seen Hellier yet, that's a really interesting series based on the is it Madisonville, Kentucky, that had those little green alien things?
Yeah, they had a battle there.
Hopkinsville.
Yep.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I took it out. I just took it off my desk. I've got a 3D model I made of the little Hopkinsville goblin. That glows in the dark even, Barbara.
Oh, gosh.
Well, the show is actually kind of interesting, and it brings to fact that there's a heck of a lot of caves where they think these goblins are coming from. Fascinating, interesting show, but it's only on Amazon Prime.
You'd
Sorry.
be surprised how many caves there are in Kentucky. Yep.
All over, yeah.
Yeah, it sure is.
But it's interesting that you bring up the idea of inspiration that the 60s had for most people, especially in the space race and also in outer space. Not only was there television shows, but also our conquest to get to the moon first.
Well, that was the thing. Back, was it 1963, something like that?
Yeah.
When Alan Shepard went up. I remember my dad waking me up and hearing just this little nipper, and Dad gets me up and says, hey, you got to check this out. You got to check this out. They're going to be launching a man in space. And I think we had to wait for hours because I think they wanted delays, if I remember right, But we had this habit of every time one of the launches went up, we had to watch it together. And when the moon landing occurred, Dad was still working. And we watched pretty much nonstop every hour that he was home, 24/7, to see what was going on with that. I was just so enthralled with the space program. But then at the same time frame, you had some of the earlier UFO shows come out. You had the Invaders that had Roy Thinnes that had the aliens that had the finger that wouldn't straighten out, which actually mine doesn't straighten out now since I fell and broke it the one time, so mine looks about the same. But that was an early show, and then you had the politically incorrect shows now. The one show that was on UFOs from England, that all the women had like purple, green, and pink hair. Everybody wore super short mini skirts, and it was like that era. But you had these shows, Lost in Space, of course, Star Trek, that really helped develop an interest of space and, what is really out there,
Right. Yeah, Star Trek, he was going to different planets, had all kinds of aliens in them.
Oh, I know. And then the shows, you had to give the storylines a grain of salt. But again, the whole idea was to create that interest in space and what could be out there, like what really could it be like on Mars. And today we've got, some excellent movies out now, like The Martian. I was watching it the other day. Mm-hmm. And when I watch it, it makes me really think, okay, could somebody really survive on Mars if they went through something like that? Yeah,
I think, didn't they do a study and found that you probably could grow potatoes on Mars?
yeah, you probably could, but on the back of my mind, I'm also going, okay, what would the ultraviolet radiation be like? You know,
Yeah,
Right.
true.
that would probably cook him like a microwave oven. You know, but
Yeah, that was kind of off. I mean, he spent way too much time outside.
too much time outside. But you basically had MacGyver on Mars.
Pretty
Is-
much.
is- but it was actually, to me, an interesting movie. To me, like, okay, what if? Could that happen? And I'm kind of like one of these. I don't know if you were the same way, Henry. I mean, growing up, I always imagined myself being in those positions. You know, what if I was on Mars? What if I was stranded? Could I have the same imagination he did? You know, could I do things like that?
Yeah, it would. I never did visualize doing something like that, just because of the unknown factors. I just never cared for the unknown.
And then you had movies like The Martian Chronicles,
Right?
and it was wonderful because there were Martians on that thing. But it really it staggered the imagination to figure out what an alien would look like if they actually did show up. To the point where we did start having a lot of flying saucer reports.
Oh, exactly. I mean, I even go back and think about the Twilight Zone. I mean, we had the Twilight Zone marathon on television the other day. And the beings that they came up with, they had all sorts of beings. And I can't help but think the same thing. What would a true alien look like if we encountered one? Would they look humanoid? Or would they look like something we couldn't even possibly imagine?
Yeah. And are they even carbon-based?
That's true. They could be silicon-based for all I know.
Yeah, they. I don't think that they would be able to be like us and survive on other planets. They.
You think of just the way that things evolve. All it takes is just a slight difference in that evolving period to make something completely different.
True.
And that's where I have an issue with the Fermi Paradox. The Fermi Paradox is, how long can a civilization last before it ultimately self-destructs?
Right.
And, I'm thinking, but you're anthropomorphizing an alien, assuming that they have the same genetic dispositions toward violence that we seem to have from our reptilian or primate brains.
Exactly. And if that was, I guess you could say, weeded out beforehand, that civilization could go on indefinitely. I mean, we just have that nature, like you say. You look at the news every day, and it's almost like sometimes we're self-destructive with
It
the things
is.
coming out.
I mean, we all
This
live.
weekend, certainly. Yeah.
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 We all live on this one planet, and I don't understand why people can't visualize we are all together on this place. We don't need to be conquering something else. It just, I don't know why they just can't get the thought in their head of living peaceably.
Exactly, and that's why I hate to watch the news, even though I tune the news in every day just to check the headlines and see what's happening real quick. There's times I hate to turn the news on because it's so much negativism out there.
It is.
And I'm also going to take and say that the news agencies themselves, to a degree, are probably at fault for a lot of it
I believe
because
that.
of the way they promote it.
Yep, I believe that 100%. Back
Oh, we
before,
got to know, but it's still fascinating that I think that people forget that technically we are we are human primates, and so we're going to have that type of behavior patterns that we sort of don't want to admit to. And I don't know if you look at different civilizations and how they would go up, our evolutionary process and how that could differ on another planet. I mean, they may not have. They may have, evolved into something completely non-volatile.
But
right?
they may not understand this, what we go through whatsoever. When they track us, let's say, for example, from a distance, I mean, monitoring our radio broadcasts, our TV broadcasts, they're seeing all these wars, all these killings. You're right, Barbara. You may have some sort of a race that has evolved that's completely foreign to, that they don't understand it.
Yeah. Well, we were talking, I think the last time you were on, about the lights off of South Carolina and North Carolina.
Right.
And we were talking before the show. I think that's around where somebody was saying that there's an unexploded atomic bomb.
Well, there's one up in North Carolina.
Okay.
And that occurred, I'm drawing a blank on the year. It goes back quite some time. I'm trying to Google it here real quick. I looked it up, and it was actually in Goldsboro, North Carolina.
Okay.
That was the city I found, and it's a small city, and it actually dropped, like we were talking about, in some swamps.
Right.
And it goes back to, off the top of my head, it has to go back into like the 1950s, 1940s, when that occurred at. And that's not along the coast. I thought it might have been a little bit closer to the coast, but it's not that close to the coast.
No, it's more toward the middle
part.
Right.
It was actually 1961 now that I look it up.
Because we look at all the reports that we've talked about where they seem to be gathered, or lights appearing, UFOs around power plants, that you wonder if they're somehow drawn to that atomic or the uranium signature.
Well, it makes you wonder, because there were a number of incidents going back into the 1960s where it wasn't just like down in North Carolina, but was out west, like in Montana, around some of the missile bases that the UFOs are being seen at. I was fortunate enough to talk to one of the individuals who was involved in one of the incidents out there where one of the missile bases was actually shut down by apparently an object that was outside of the base itself.
Whoa.
And the scary part about that is, if you think if something has the technology to shut a base down, they may also have the power to start something up.
Wait a minute, they shut down the power to the base?
They actually caused the missiles to go offline. And there's roughly 10 Minuteman missiles, I believe it was, that all started powering down in sequence. And when they contacted the organization who built the electronics for it, they did a check on it. And the only thing they could come up with is something like an EMP shut it down. Like some sort of electronic force knocked them offline, but at that time we did not have the technology that used to do things like that.
Now, but wouldn't an EMP pulse disable it completely forever?
In this case, I don't know. I wouldn't swear that 100%. They were able to power all the systems back up later on. They had to go back out and manually basically reboot everything to get them back online. But it's a scary thought in itself that when you think something can be taken offline, that we have no control over. I automatically think, just my own way of thinking, that, okay, if they can power it down, then they can also most likely power it up if they wanted to.
Or set it off.
Exactly. And then next thing you know, you've got this whole war games thing going on that they power it up. Let's say they do a launch at somebody else. Somebody else launches us, and next thing you know, we have this whole war game scenario going on that wasn't caused by anybody except let's say I don't know if it was the right word, but alien intelligence, you know?
And I think by shutting it down, they're trying to show that they can stop a war like that. I don't think that if they're coming here to get resources, they surely don't want the planet itself destroyed.
No, you wouldn't think so.
Yeah.
You wouldn't think so.
And who knows what kind of bases that they have here, maybe underground, or their, I don't know, food sources, or maybe some type of fuel that they're getting for their ships.
Right. They may have some sort of a element they're looking for here, for all we know.
Right.
Some type of a resource that we're just not familiar with.
So you would think that if we actually was going to do something like that, that they would have some way that they could actually stop it.
You would think.
Right.
And the only thing that in the back of my mind that happens always, you've got groups out there who will say, well, if we ever got to the point of destroying our own planet, they would stop us. And I'm like, not necessarily.
No.
No.
It depends on what their motives are.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll say, let's let them wipe themselves out and we'll start with a clean slate again.
That's possible.
Yeah. And by the way, Barbara, I just looked up that one in North Carolina, and they did recover some of those. One you may have been thinking of was down in Florida, I think.
Okay. I know there's one that got ditched off the ocean, right?
Florida, Georgia, that ended up in swamps they never recovered.
Okay.
Yeah. But still, I mean, nonetheless, I mean, here were atomic weapons being dropped basically by accident over American soil.
But also, I mean, even if we were to go into space and looking at different planets, I think probably the one indicator of a more advanced civilization would be a power source of some sort. So it kind of is logical that they would be down near power plants, nuclear power plants especially, because it has its own signature of a higher technology, right?
Correct. Because it shows that much higher level of technology. And just not only its higher technology, but also its destructive power. That you'd think somebody would also want to keep track of it. And then you look at potentially the propulsion side. What if let's say a entity has a technology out there for using nuclear or something along those lines of power source for their drive system on their craft, whatever they may be. It just shows that, okay, they're getting ready to take that step, that like that first child step. And now we've got to really start watching them.
How many, do you know exactly of the satellite systems that we have up there? A lot of them are nuclear powered still, correct?
A lot of the older ones are.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many, though. That would be an interesting question. How many of those are actually nuclear powered? A number were going to solar power, but nuclear power, that's a good question.
Well, the old Mir space station was nuclear powered, right?
That was nuclear powered.
Yeah. And I think probably our old International Space Station was as well.
Most likely, going back to that. But you're going back to, 1970s, 1980s, and so technologies. And, along those lines. But the thing is who knows how many satellites may be up there that were launched, let's say, 1960s, 1970s. They're just still up there, just floating around, even though they're not useful anymore. They're just up there basically as space garbage that may have some sort of nuclear power source still on them yet.
Yeah, it's interesting that we launched these satellites without any sort of planned recovery or
How to get rid
disposal.
of them.
Yeah, exactly. I was just looking this afternoon. I didn't read the whole story over, but there are satellites called Iridium satellites. And these had...
With Iridium 142?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
These had these big panels on them. And these satellites, I forget how many there were. There's quite a few up there. They, at a certain time of morning, certain time of evening, Barbara, they would hit a certain point where the sun would reflect off of these panels. And if you happen to look in that exact area at the right time, it'd look almost like a Star Trek vehicle warping out. You would just see this bright, brilliant flash in that area, and then gone.
Wow.
And I would have reports coming in where somebody said, I was looking up at the sky and I saw this thing like go into warp drive. Well, if you check the schedule of these iridium flare, as they call it, iridium flare is what they call it, these iridium satellites, you would see it may coincide exactly with these time frames. And you could even predict when they were going to go off, when you could see them. But there is an article this afternoon where a number of them now are being taken out of service, and they're just floating around up there. And they were basically saying that, okay, you pay us and we'll take them down. Wait a minute, you launched them up. Shouldn't there be a plan where you're responsible to also bring them down if they're not going to be useful anymore? To me, you would
brought
think.
Down safely.
Right, and you would think, but no, they say basically, okay, if somebody offers us the right money, we'll bring them down. So in other words, you're just going to leave them there in the way.
Makes no sense. Or at least fire them into the sun.
Well, what they did do is some of them, some time ago, they actually changed their orbit. So you don't see the flare off of them anymore. But they're basically in a different type of an orbit than what they had before. But still, to me, they're just potentially space junk just floating around up there.
Now, I've seen several maps out there where somebody actually placed all the satellites in orbit and showed them around the globe. And it looks like a mess.
It is a mess.
And it makes me wonder, how people can determine whether it's garbage, an active satellite, or a UFO.
Well, that's the challenge. I mean, one of the websites out there is called Heavens Above. And I believe they've got access to the map that you're talking about. And you can see it kind of like in real time. And you see all this junk, thousands and thousands of satellites floating around up there. And you're right. You can have potentially, to me, a fair idea of how many are truly active and truly functional. But to me, there's always going to be that, okay, what about something that was launched was never truly tracked that well? Or you may have an object floating, but you don't know what it is.
You got
or it's top secret.
you got all the parts from rockets that's went up, like the engines that fall away from it. All that stuff just floating around out there.
Oh, sure. You've got boosters, too.
Yeah.
And they track those.
And it's, so, you would think, I know space is large, and they say that there's plenty of room out there. But eventually, you're going to have something that's going to be running into something that you really needed.
Well, that's it. There's always going to be that chance for something that's in that same orbit, something that's floating around that may not be tracked that well. And there's, to me, always that chance of a collision with something.
Yeah, one thing that wouldn't be good right now is to be a NASA technician, because to have to figure out how to launch a rocket now to the moon or to the space station and to avoid every single tracking satellite that there is out there in the trajectory.
Well, that's it. I mean, you think of like working for NASA, and let's say the moon launches that are looking at coming up down the road. think of getting something up that big, the Saturn V rocket. You take X number of orbits around the Earth. You may have so much junk in the way, and then you start leaving the Earth, and you've got certain satellites that are now farther out than what they had in the past. So to me, it's just almost like you have to weave through an obstacle course just to make sure you don't hit anything.
I don't have to worry too much about hitting anything because I don't plan on going up anywhere.
Well, I'm with you. I really don't plan on volunteering. I mean, what was it? John Glenn went up when he was 77.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't plan on doing that.
No.
Well, you know, I think they're looking at commercial flights in 2022.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
what they're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, just going up, I guess, to just out of the atmosphere, I guess, and then come back
Right.
down. Yeah.
Just
That
to
way
say
they-
you were in space.
Just to
which
say
is
you're
good.
in space.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you've got more private space groups jumping on board.
Yes.
You've got other countries now, India, China doing more launches. And China had a thing today where one of their agencies was looking at doing like 40 launches or something like that in 2020.
Wow.
And going back to your comment there, Barbara, what about all the junk from those? You know, how well is that stuff being tracked? Who knows?
Yeah. So, yeah, my next commercial endeavor will be space garbage.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
Make a lot of money off of that.
with all the aliens actually shooting around everywhere, what do they think about all this space junk now that they've got to dodge?
You know, that'd be a good question. Is it a problem for them? Because I went to people who are very open-minded. Aliens, I mean, I believe there's got to be something out there because, as the old saying goes, that's a lot of wasted space if not. But I'm still very open-minded to say, I'm not going to say that they're not interdimensional. And that may all not be a problem of something that's traveling interdimensional.
Hmm.
Yeah,
But
if you're going from one dimension to the other and all of a sudden you pop into this one and all of a sudden your eyes open wide because all of a sudden there's a piece of space junk right in front of you.
well, true. And this is where we could have potentially those crashes, like, let's say if something happened at Roswell
True.
or the other ones, that all of a sudden somebody pops in, comes into our system, and all of a sudden, what the heck is this? Boom.
Yeah, that's about the way it would happen too.
And, you know, what idiot would put something here, you know? But, you know, you would think that they would have the technologies to dodge stuff that was there. You would think.
Yeah, they
But
might
then
be.
again,
They
you
might
never
be.
know.
Well, I mean, that's like using a road map, and you know the highways there, but you're not always going to see that there's a cow in the middle of the road.
True. It's like using your GPS system and being directed down a one-way street, you know?
Yep. So who knows, what they expect and what's supposed to be there is two different things.
Right.
Yeah.
But so much junk up in space, to me, it's would be almost impossible, I have to be honest with you, to track everything that's been launched.
Yeah.
And document what everything is, because there's got to be stuff that's floating around up there that's basically marked unknown. They don't know what it really is. They can suspect it may be a certain booster. They may suspect it may be a certain satellite from a certain era. Mm-hmm. But they may only be speculating.
Well, now, if that stuff tends to fall back toward Earth, doesn't it mostly burn up in the atmosphere?
Mostly does burn up. But when you get certain very large stuff, like down the road, look at the ISS, as big as that thing is getting. What if the ISS gets to that point someday? Then it's going to come down. They're going to have to bring it down basically to me in pieces. to increase the likelihood of it burning up in the atmosphere on the way down.
Maybe
because if it came down as one whole, it may, who knows how much may survive.
Maybe in the future they could put detonation charges in it that if it starts coming back, it would blow up, so it would be smaller on reentry.
Be smaller.
Yeah.
Or they can just maybe have it, different parts break off as they assemble it up there.
That's possible.
Now, I know that there's been reports, people are screaming that they've seen UFOs, and it turns out to be the new SpaceX satellite systems, which are chained together, correct?
Well, they're in a sense chained together, but they've been separating farther as they go. And there is something like a proposed 1,000 satellites.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be connected together in this sequence. And I haven't heard anything come in, at least in their own state recently, regarding those. But when they originally launched, they were much closer together. And they're appearing more as a stream of people knew where, especially where to look for them. And we had a couple of reports I did see that came in some time ago. Were not long after they launched, but people were describing something as basically like almost in a stream going across the sky, and that's what they were seeing. But that's something unique in itself. And that's why when I do investigations, one of the first things I'll do is go to certain websites and look up satellite schedules, or I've actually got astronomy software that has satellites that I can do overlays on, basically looking at the sky. So I could basically, Barbara, say I'm at this location, give it a city, basically, set a time frame, and I can look at the sky above that area at that time frame. And the closer you get to the exact time, in other words, the sooner you can get to that exact time, the better. So if somebody reported something yesterday, you want to make sure you get in as soon as possible, because satellite data on the software I'm using gets a little bit more erroneous the farther you get from the exact date it occurred at, because I guess some of the math that's associated with it. But you could go in with this software, and it's available for anybody. It's called Stellarium. And you can take and pull up the sky, and it gives you an idea of exactly what is overhead at that time. And I use it a lot when I see something like the ISS or other satellites going over, because it'll show the angle it's coming up in the sky, what direction it's coming from. You can even see how long it is visible, because like the ISS, it lights up basically in one color, very brilliant, and then goes dim when it's basically going into the shadows of the Earth. So it really helps you identify things like that, but also you can predict when you're going to see certain things with that same software. So what I'll do if I want to see like the ISS or certain other satellites, I'll take and go in and do like a fast forward. I can fast forward through things. And I can say, okay, the ISS should be popping up over the horizon at such and such a time. We'll get the binoculars out and we'll go check it out. Or like the satellite you were talking about, I could go out and see if it's visible within a certain time frame and do the same thing, get the binocs out and go look for it.
And you say that's free?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
That's a good thing about it. And free is good.
Free is good. I just put the link in the chat room.
I see.
Yeah, it's a very good software, and they've got a version which you don't even have to download. But I like to download stuff on my computer, and I've also got on my laptops and some of the other stuff I take with me when I do my field investigations. But it's a great software.
I like it. I'm looking at what it's showing in the visualization, and it's showing the iridium flare simulation, eclipse simulations, shooting stars, star twinkling, and what it does.
And they'll even say, like, if you got like meteor showers, they'll give you an idea of what direction they're coming from, which is good.
Yeah, and there's one this weekend, correct?
I didn't even look.
It's after midnight in the northeast.
That sounds correct. I didn't look it up. To be honest with you, I haven't looked recently.
Our problem is with cloud cover, you aren't going to see anything.
Well, that's part of it. I haven't been looking at stuff because we've had so much cloud cover.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the Bay Area, it's if there's going to be a celestial event, there'll be fog. I mean,
It'll
that's
be
just how
fog.
it is.
Well, yeah, and that's the way with an astronomy group I'm with here in Ohio. At times when we have our what we call Star Party Weekend, which is like a whole weekend event where, I mean, they'll set up telescopes all over the place in an open field. It's actually a very, very great area. It's up on a hill. There's very, very, very little ambient light because it's so far from everything else. And we've got our mammoth telescope we call Big Blue. But you have all these telescopes set up, and it seems like most weekends when we do that, it always rains, cloud cover, something obstructs it.
And where's this take place at?
This is actually in Belleville, Ohio. And it'll take place right around the end of September. And they've got a website that's called, that's for the Warren Rupp Observatory. And they've got a party they call the Star Party at Hidden Hollow. Is what it's called. It's actually the area, Henry, that's the coldest part of Ohio.
The coldest?
On an average in the wintertime.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's got to be a little bit of a hill or...
Well, they've got some hills, and there's actually a ski resort in the same area.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. But you get a little ways from there. I think it's about 12 miles from like the closest highway.
Yeah.
And I was out there at night, and I didn't have a flashlight like a stupid idiot. And I'm falling all over the place because it is so dark. And the night I was out there, there was no moon. All you had was just some very, very mild starlight. And it was just incredibly dark. You couldn't even see your hand in front of your face.
Wow.
But it's a great place to go down to, and they do a lot of educational things for people. And if anybody's in the Ohio region or thinking of traveling to the area, check out the Warren Rupp Observatory and look up on their website for Warren Rupp Observatory when they've got their open weekends, because they'll have one weekend a month typically when they've got like an open house.
Wow.
Where people can come in on the weekend. And they'll have the telescope, big telescope being manned and stuff like that, and they'll have little events going on out there.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's a great group.
I'll tell them you sent me.
Yeah, tell me that's fine. No, they probably won't let you in then, but you know.
I'd go, but I wouldn't let anybody else use a telescope.
They'd be saying, I don't know who that is.
Well, one of the first times I went down there, Henry, to really go check the telescope out, they had to put me up in this lift. One of those lifts that roll around on the wheels that telescope up.
Yeah. Wow.
And the higher we're going up, I'm like, I don't like this because this thing is shaking.
I assume,
and of course, you probably had some on either end that were making it shake intentionally. You know,
I assume you could probably
my hands grab hold of the rails real tight.
I assume you could probably see pretty good into the space then.
Yeah, and I mean, this is one of the larger amateur telescopes in the country, and we're fortunate to have it right here in Ohio. And one of the things they're very proud of, too, is the educational stuff that they're doing down there. They're fairly high ranking in the country as far as educational projects going on. And I think that's extremely important, too, is educating people on the sky, the stars.
They ever pick up seeing anything like maybe UFOs?
Actually, I have talked to some of the members of the group, and they were telling me about some of their sightings on their own.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. They were telling me about seeing triangular-shaped aircraft that were completely black at night.
Wow.
And a number of things weren't necessarily through telescopes, but through like binoculars.
Huh.
as a number of them will just lay out at night, like in lawn chairs looking up at the sky through binoculars. And I had 3 different people tell me about large black triangular craft coming overhead. And that's what they were watching.
Not making any noise.
No noise, just moving very slowly across the sky.
Wow.
And they weren't clouds because they were very distinct triangular shaped craft.
No lights on them.
No lights whatsoever. And that's the same type of object I saw going back 15 to 20 years ago now. A very large, distinct black triangular shaped craft. But I did get some other pictures sent to me by members of the group to look at. And what some of them were doing is like picking up, in this case, they were maybe taking pictures of like the moon. And you could see objects moving across the moon.
Really?
And the question I had was, okay, is this a object moving in front of the moon? Is it a bird, something much closer, or is it something much farther away? And that was the problem, is, proving how far that object was away from the camera.
Right.
From the source, from the telescope that was taken with. And the thing that I didn't have enough information on is, okay, like in this case, the depth of field as far as focus goes. If something were passing like a bird in front of this telescope, how sharp would that image be, going in front of it?
Well, especially if you're pulling up something close on the moon and something like a bird flies in front of it, wouldn't it kind of like be pretty blurred?
Yeah, it'd be kind of blurred. And one individual thought that it was like an object definitely at the moon going across it. And I'm like, well, okay, now let's think about this. Let's be rational. If something was flying across in front of the moon itself at the distance of the moon, think about the size of this object going across in comparison to the moon.
Right.
And think of how big it would,
huge,
in theory, exactly how it would. I mean, here we're looking at something bigger than the Starship Enterprise going across in front of the moon. So that's why I tend to think it was something actually much closer.
But, with even our technology today, and I think it's called Vanta Black, I mean, if you really wanted to disguise a spaceship, and you only want to show up at night, I mean, that would be the perfect alternative, right?
Yeah, and there's technologies now that they're really working on that are making things more towards the side of being cloaked or being to the point of basically being invisible, like you're saying, Barbara. That technology, I don't think, is really that far away from being more of a reality. And one of the things that I was checking out over the holidays, I was reading a couple stories about basically going into the cloaking. I mean, when some of the aircraft were being developed, in this case, like the SR-71 Blackbird, some of the ones like that, they were being coated with materials. The same with like the B-2, the F-117 are being coated with materials to make them more radar resistant. But now they're looking at materials that they're being coated with, not just make them anti-radar, but to decrease their visibility, period.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Toyota has come up with one. It's called Optical Cloaking.
Right.
Yeah.
And the one I was looking at for the military, it was like, it's like, okay, this could be why when people are looking for, let's say, materials from a crashed UFO, this could be one of the things that maybe they're looking at, is the materials themselves to see if they're reacting in a way that's almost making them cloaked. Like some of these things we're talking about, like some of the things Toyota has, or the military, to try to make the craft basically invisible. So if you're looking at it from the ground and you've got a blue sky behind it, the craft itself basically turns blue. But if you're looking at the craft from above, the material changes almost like shades to blend with the ground down below it, almost like a chameleon. So if you're looking at this crashed UFO, one of the things they could be looking at is materials it's made of to see if it has that type of a capability, because I've heard of stories for years where not just, in this case, the craft, but even people are swearing that the entities themselves almost had a cloaking ability. I've had cases where people said that, yeah, they saw this object hovering, but it didn't look like an object. It looked more like, again, they go back and use the movie Predator, like the little waveform in the movie Predator. And they're saying it looks something like that. They knew something was there, but they couldn't make out what it was.
Wow. Yeah, there's another one. I think there's a biotechnology related one called quantum stealth technology. And that really is turning people, that shimmery sort of predator type of cloaking.
Yeah.
If we can do it.
Well, sure, if we can do it. I mean, like our conversation at the beginning of the show, I mean, we're kind of like in the primate stage of this whole thing. Something that's something or somebody who's more advanced than we are. Let's just say 100 years, assuming technology doubles every 2 years. Think of how far we can be in 100 years.
Well, now, if we're, I guess, in contact with aliens, certain ones, I would say, how much technology do you think we have gotten from them on how to do stealth, you might say?
Good question, Henry. Good question. See, now to me, if I watch our news, I wouldn't give us anything. If you see the news, certain TV shows out there, I wouldn't give us anything. But to me, I would think, okay, is it something that they've given us, or we've been able to basically put pieces together of something we've recovered and maybe reverse engineered some things to a degree. The reality is, I think you may have a little bit of both. Now, the first question is, if they've shared technologies with us, who shared it? Why have they shared it? What's their motives for sharing it? Are they good motives? Are they bad motives? And all I hear is, the speculation, the rumor mills and stuff about things, like going back to the agreement with Eisenhower in the 1950s, that there was supposedly the agreement made that they would share technologies with us in exchange for, let's say, resources. And those resources happen to be human resources. And as the story goes, it depends on if you believe it or not, that in this case, they would share technologies as long as they could be able to abduct humans and do analysis of humans. And supposedly things were being documented. Okay, this person was taken, this person was returned. And it was supposed to be like a system where, okay, we're going to be fully disclosed to, not the public, but the government, on everything going on. Who was taken, what happened, and they were returned and everything like that. But this is where you get into some of the other stories where you got areas like in Dulce, out west, where supposedly there's underground bases. And on these underground bases, there is the story of an individual who was working out there on one of these underground bases. It had like 13 levels or something like that. The top levels had humans working on them. But the farther down you got, there were aliens. And they were supposedly doing some work in one type of a section. And I'm trying to remember the exact story, Henry, but they were doing some type of construction or something like that and broke into an area where the crew that was there, the base personnel along with military personnel, encountered aliens that they didn't expect to be there. And as they were looking through this area, they also saw that the aliens weren't being, let's say, totally truthful. That there was humans being basically dissected, experimented on, and so forth. That, as the story goes, it was outside of the guidelines from what was supposed to happen. A firefight eventually ensued. Different military personnel were supposedly wounded or killed, along with entities. And then the area was basically sealed back up. But again, if you go into those stories about Dulce, and if you believe into those stories, and the difficult part is just separating the fact from the fiction.
Right.
Were there agreements made? If there were, what type of technology is being exchanged and so forth? I mean, I've got no evidence to say, 100% evidence that says it didn't happen out in Dulce, but I've got in the back of my mind, I'm also like, also seems like a very far-fetched story, on the other hand. So it's just getting the proof behind those things. And so when it goes back to your question there, Barbara, like these technologies, where did they come from? The indications I'm seeing is from some of the stuff that's being recovered or being talked about being recovered, they're still like in the experimentation stage, They're seeing stuff, they're tracking down these metamaterials that have these unusual properties, they're trying to figure out how these properties work. And now that I just thought about it, the Army basically entered into an agreement with To the Stars Academy last year, at the end of last year, where if To the Stars Academy, which is this private group, if they find some unique materials that they think are unusual along the lines of alien, that the Army is willing to jump in and help do analysis on it.
Very true.
Mm-hmm.
Here's kind of the argument I have about the humanoid testing. Now, I realize that, through abductions, they could do the non-ethical testing. But, they could probably learn a lot more just from all the genome databases, all the stuff that we have on file as far as, vast knowledge of human anatomy.
Sure.
Why the testing is necessary?
Yeah, that I don't know, because to me, you're right. That part seems kind of like primitive. I mean, if they've got such advanced technologies, why not basically hack into our databases and take information that's already there, DNA information and so forth. Some of the stories I've heard about the testing seem like really much more primitive,
It seems almost like more of torture than actual.
Yeah, exactly.
Medical.
Exactly. That's what it seemed like to me.
You would think that they'd be a lot further advanced in the equipment and different types of things that they would be using to test someone, that they should be able to do tests and we probably wouldn't even feel anything.
You would think so. But on one hand, though, do they understand emotions? Do they have emotions?
Well, are they real or are they only like robots?
That's the other thing. Who's conducting these experiments? If there's something that's more like a robotic type creature, they may have no emotions. All they're doing is just basically following orders to do something. But again, it seems like some of these things that's being described, Barbara, seem very crude. Not in a way to, let's say, gain the most scientific information as possible.
Right.
there'd have to be much more advanced ways, like you say, of being able to extract this information. I mean, to me,
wouldn't you think that all the years that they've probably been stopping by here, that they would pretty much know the people that's living here? So I wonder what it is they're actually looking for if they're doing testing.
you're right. I mean, as we were talking here, Henry, I just thought about like a CAT scan. Think about what we can do with a CAT scan, but think about a technology, let's say several hundred years in advance, could do with that advanced technology along those same lines. So they could gain so much more information.
See, and they should have stuff like that because they're further advanced than we are to start with.
Right. They should.
Yeah.
The biggest thing in the back of my mind, I can't help but think about is maybe it's the human part of us, the emotions, the feelings.
Right.
That is, as we started out the show, Barbara, you mentioned about the fact that basically an alien race developing in such a way that they don't understand our animal instincts, basically. Well, maybe you've got this alien race that doesn't understand emotions. Let's say simple things like the family unit, they don't understand. What would it be like, you know?
Psychological, yeah.
Exactly, the psychological side.
Yeah.
And to me, that would be one of the things that, you know, they may be looking at. But if they watch our TV shows and everything else, I mean, they'll never figure out the psychological side.
They probably get good laughs. All right.
Yeah.
I think what we're going to do is take us a quick break, and we'll come back, talk some more. And we got some other things we're going to be talking about, too, and we'll get into those when we get back. So give us about 2 or 3 minutes, and we'll be right back. So thank everybody for being with us tonight, and I'm going to let Barbara take us out on a break.
Okay, folks, you are listening to the Paranormal View here on ParaX Radio Network with our very special guest, Ohio MUFON Director Thomas Wertman, and we'll be right back after a few messages.
Whether you're listening at home, at work, or anywhere, thanks for making ParaX part of your day. Your source for everything paranormal, ParaX.
And welcome back, everybody, right here to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. I want to thank everybody for being with us tonight, those in the chat room and those listening from around the world. We appreciate each and every one of you. If you do have questions tonight, you can private chat them to either Ceiling Cat or H. Foister, and we will get those answered for you. I want to welcome back Barbara Duncan.
I am still here.
All right. She has not been abducted.
Nope.
And, of course, our great guest, Mr. Thomas Wertman.
I'm here, too. I just got my cup of coffee in my hand, so.
That's okay. We
It's the
allow you.
Quantron quadranted meteor showers tonight.
Okay.
So if you don't have clouds or snow or rain like what we do,
Yep.
We do.
you can step outside and maybe see something. Maybe you might see something you don't want to see too. So anyway, getting back to I want to kind of put a little hold on the UFOs that we was talking about, because there's something else that I wanted to find out about some stuff. Thomas had sent me a thing and said that he's been working on some things that when he was a little boy, back about when I was a little boy, the toys that they would have that you could play with would be motorized or something like that. Only Thomas has taken it to a little step further than something like that, because it's toys he didn't have that now he's trying to make. And
Yeah.
I want to find out about that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, see, Henry, I was from a family who were very limited income. My dad worked. My mom didn't work. My mom stayed at home, took care of the 3 kids. And Dad made like maybe $100 a week or something like that at the most. So, I mean, you had a very, very limited income. And when it came to toys, probably the best toy that we had was just go outside and play. You know?
Yes, that's true.
We didn't have much. I mean, I remember getting one little robot toy and a few other things as a kid, but other than that, I didn't have them. So I'd always say, hey, can you get me this? Okay. Yeah, no, sorry. It's not in our budget. So a lot of things that you saw like at Christmas time on TV, all those special toys that they'd promote, I never saw. So now, as I said earlier, I'm in my second childhood. And being from a techie, geeky, nerdy type background, I guess you could say, now it's time for me to start enjoying some of those again. And one of the things I did a few years ago, I was injured at work, so I was off work for a while, and I bought a 3D printer. And I built one, and I kind of put it on the shelf like a lot of us do with our toys, and forgot about it for a little while, and I got it back out, and I started really getting down what I'm supposed to be doing with it, how it's supposed to work, understanding the technology a lot more, and one printer is now turned into 5. So I've got 5 3D printers in my office.
Wow.
Well, let's see. Here's the reality, Barbara. You have to have 2 because if one breaks, you have a backup to keep working.
Very true.
And I just did it as an experiment. Said, okay, the first 2 went pretty good. I got the technologies down. Let's improve upon those and let's keep going with it. Well, now I've got all 5 running. And I said, what can I build with these things? Well, one of the things I started playing around with was some of the toys from like the 1950s, 1960s. I've got a fairly good size collection of stuff. I've collected toys that were made pretty much like from the, I'm guessing right around maybe 1980s on. And I've got like the Lost in Space robots, the Robbie the robots, some of the other types of toys going back to then. And some of these are anywhere from like maybe about 8, actually take it back, I've got some about 4 inches tall going up to 2 feet tall. And the thing is, a lot of the older ones, you've got either earlier electronics or just pretty much motorized systems, or you've got even some which are wind up and just all mechanics. Well, one of the things I want to do is go back and recreate some of those things, but then also go back and kind of polish some of those up because I'm now getting more familiar with the electronics because I did teach electronics for a while as one of my backgrounds. So I'm getting into some of the microprocessors, some of the small circuits, and putting basically little small program chips inside these robots to do the mechanics now, to control the mechanics. So I'm drawing them up in 3-dimensional, as I told Henry, drawing them all up in 3D, assembling the whole things in 3D so I can see how they all go together to make sure all the parts fit, because I have done a few of those things, Henry, where I did a few things separately and didn't assemble it together on the computer. And then when I print them out, I find out they don't fit together. So now what I've been doing is drawing up a lot of the parts. And all the parts pretty much in 3D. The other thing I've done is some people share like these little microprocessors, but not just share, but share 3D designs of them. So I can go back and work the processors I'm going to use, the motors I'm going to use, and all these things and put them together as a unit before I ever make it. So I can kind of go back through and troubleshoot to make sure everything will fit. And just for the novelty, the fun of it, now that I'm retired. So I retired in October. I made sure I bought a bunch of filaments. I bought a bunch of motors and things like that before I retired to kind of stockpile. And since that time, I've gone back now, Henry, and made about 25 to 30 robots since October.
Wow.
Yeah. And I start out simple because I'm kind of like the child learning to walk. I went back and took some of the ones which were basically just motorized. And now I've got these things where, I fire them up, they go walking across the room, pushing carts. And here you've got the arms, the legs moving and so forth on them. Kind of toys that you had from that 1960s time frame. But I've started getting into some of the ones now where I've got the processors inside of them. So it's replacing the old mechanical type circuits you had years ago. I'm fascinated, by the way, if the mechanics that some of these engineers came up with, these toy designers came up with it in the 50s and 60s, how they could make these bump and go toys basically out of just motors and springs and mechanics. Now I'm going and doing the same thing with basically little microprocessors that you hook them up to little ultrasonic sensors, so when this thing comes up and senses an object so far in front of it, Barbara, it knows to turn. It senses something there. It's almost like a little miniature radar system.
Sort of like those little robot sweepers.
Yeah. And these things are fun. I mean, it's enjoyable to play with those things. And as I go, Henry, I'm trying to evolve more and more and more. And now what I've got to do in the process is order a lot more parts. And also check out my programming knowledge in a whole different direction. And the bad part is you actually, a good part on one hand, you've got people who share stuff, share their information, share what they've programmed. But the unfortunate thing is sometimes when they share that knowledge with others, they may forget things. They may make typos. Sometimes maybe what would work for them doesn't work for somebody else, and you've got to go back and you've got to do some troubleshooting. And that's why I love the critical thinking aspect of it, to really challenge my mind to, see what I can come up with.
So how does these printers actually work? I mean,
well,
how big of a piece can you make with one?
Well, mine, I'm limited just because of the size of my house right now, this where I live at. But I can do things basically about a foot wide, 12 by 12 by about 18 inches high. So I can do fairly good-sized objects. And how they basically work is the material itself, when it's basically formed, you've got reels of plastic. And it shoots this plastic out of a little nozzle, hot nozzle, almost like a hot glue gun. But think of a hot glue gun, Henry, under computer control. So what I do is when I draw my objects up, I want to print in three-dimensional. I'll draw all the pieces up separately. And I take this three-dimensional model that you can look at my computer and I can spin it around so it looks like the actual part. I can even put materials on it to make it look like the actual part, and you'll swear that it's almost like a photograph of an image, and it's an object that's just a computer-generated graphic. And I've been doing that part for a number of years because when I was teaching some engineering classes, I used to teach the 3D designing. And when I took over a program for somebody, and this goes back, 20-some years ago, one of the directors of the campus walked in, and he looked at the computer screens that the students were working on. He goes, "You've got photographs on the screen?" I said, "No, these are computer-generated models." And they'd never seen anything like that before in that location. And I said, what we did is we drew them up, we applied materials to them, we put lights all around them to kind of highlight certain shapes, and you're seeing a three-dimensional model rendered to look like an actual part. Well, I can take this individual part and use another software that basically slices it down into thicknesses anywhere from basically about the sheet of a piece of paper in thickness up to about 3 pieces of paper in thickness if I want. And I can slice it down in these little layers. And what it does is it takes that object and slices it down and basically stacks all those layers on top of each other. And when it prints out one layer at a time and builds layer upon layer, almost like a layer cake from the bottom up. And what this is called additive manufacturing, where you're basically adding material, not taking material away. You're adding material on top of material to create an object. And this is technologies that's expanded from the hobbyists like myself to industry, where they're printing out parts for rockets now for NASA with 3D printers. They're doing stuff in the medical field with 3D printers.
Mm-hmm. They're building houses.
Building houses. I mean, they're finding so many uses for these things. And this is, to me, is just an infant stage with it. But I can take and create this three-dimensional object from basically an idea I had in my mind. And where a lot of stuff came from is some of the first 3D stuff that I was involved with, Henry, goes back to, wow, that long ago, about 30 years ago. I'd heard about this process called stereolithography, which is a term for these things. And I got a hold of a phaser from Star Trek that was 3D printed. And all it is a resin that looks almost like amber material. And what they did at that time, Barbara, is they took this liquid tank of resin and shot a laser into it, but again traced out an image layer by layer in this liquid resin. And where the laser hit it basically solidified the object. Wow. They took it out, they drained all the other liquid away, they cured the resin, and you had a 3D model. And the companies that were going after this stuff was companies like Ford, GM, NASA, all these big corporations like this. Because what they wanted to do is create a 3D model of a part. So let's say, for example, if they were building a new car, you could build a dashboard of a new car, create the whole interior with no molds, no dies to stamp parts out with. And you could basically sit in a driver's seat and see if everything was physically good for you before it was ever made. Now, what they're working on is not the prototyping side, but they're working on the point of being able to manufacture a part without molds and so forth. And if they can speed the process up fast enough, they could eliminate a lot of the tooling and the expenses that they had in the process of making things.
How long does it take to print out a specific object?
That's the part that can slow you down. Like right now, I've got parts that I've had print anywhere from just a few minutes for very rough shapes. But when you get into very complex parts to big parts, it could be printing for a day or two.
Wow, really?
On some of the stuff I've done, yeah. It just depends on how complex the part really is.
So how expensive is this material that you have to buy to be able to use to make these parts with?
Well, I'm using basic like rolls of filament for the type I've got, but I also have some that have liquid resins or some that have powders. I'm on a beer budget, so I can't afford that. But the reels of stuff I'm buying is roughly about $20 a roll of filament. Mm-hmm. And I've got probably about 15 rolls in my office right now.
Nice.
Of different types, different colors. You can buy it in different colors. You can buy it in different types of materials.
Huh.
I keep waiting for the day when we start doing with plastic recycling.
Well, there's some groups out there right now that's taking some of the plastics and recycling some of those plastics into stuff for 3D printing. The drawback is I think some of the stuff right now that they're doing is a little bit more expensive than what it costs to buy a roll of fresh filament. And that's going to be the hang-up if it costs more for recycled materials. But if they can get that process down, that'll change the whole ball game, though.
Wow. That sounds...
Yeah, it'd be nice if you could go right from a drinking bottle, throw it in some sort of machine, and have it come out. being used for a 3D printer.
Exactly. Spit it right out into a roll of filament. That would be great.
Wow.
But I've loved it on here because it's the idea of, at my point of life in the retired age, I have to keep my mind busy. And I want to keep raising the bar for myself on knowledge and not let it drop, you know. And sometimes I'll do stuff here, Barbara, I feel like a complete idiot because I've overlooked some of the most obvious stuff. But like when I was showing my wife the one day, I made up one robot that I had my cell phone out. And she goes, "What do you do with your cell phone?" Well, I turned the robot on, and I'm controlling the robot from my cell phone, taking it all around the floor of the house.
Nice.
And I had a couple different ones. One was the, Jeffrey would have loved this one. It was a Dalek from Doctor Who.
Sweet.
And I've got it motorized. This one has some different processors in it. And I'm working on advancing it a little bit now so that the head and stuff turns compared to what it was doing. I actually had some servos and stuff, different types of motors left over from other projects over the years that I've been cannibalizing and using. I've been recycling my old stuff, Barbara. I call it my reclamation bin, where if I have something that broke, like I had some of these flashlights from, I won't name the store, but let's just say that they're a tool supplier that gives away free flashlights almost every time you walk in. I had some of these flashlights go bad, and now I'm repurposing them into desk lights. I made up a pedestal and stuff for them. I've got a boom coming up, and I took the guts out of the inside of flashlights, so I'm making it into a desk light that'll still work.
Nice.
But I'm repurposing a lot of electronics I had over the years. When I used to teach electronics, I had all these old chips and so forth that I'm using all over again now.
Wow.
And I just love the challenge of that. But she says, "You're controlling that for your cell phone?" I said, "Yeah, I put a little wireless circuit in the robot, so it picks up. It runs off of basically like a Bluetooth."
Stick an Alexa in there and
yeah. So I can guide it all over. Well, actually, I ordered some little stuff from overseas. It's the same type of like little recording things that they use almost in cards, except a little bit more advanced. Greeting cards. So I'm going to start recording stuff and putting it on the robots then.
Oh Lord.
So I've already got a number of projects in mind for that. And the bad part is I'll start on something and then I'll get sidetracked. I'll say, hey, I could do this and do it a little bit more advanced. I'll have to order some parts and wait on the parts to come in.
Wow.
But it's really interesting now, Henry, to see, with our technologies we have now. I mean, here's these little processors that basically this whole board is about as big as my thumb, that I can control the motors, LEDs, all these other little things from that little small board once it's programmed up.
Wow. Yeah, you got to have big magnifying glass to work on that stuff.
Oh, believe me, I've got like 3 of them in my office.
Wow.
But it's fun working on those because it's just a challenge of it. And you've got groups out there of people that are really into this stuff, and they'll share information. Sometimes they'll share so much information to lead you down the path a little bit and then make you reason your way out the rest of the way.
Wow. Take you down the alley and might be a dead end, but there's a secret way out and they don't tell you.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. But I love doing those things. And it just keeps my mind busy, and I love playing with the printers and stuff like that, because the good thing is I can take and design something out. Once it's designed up, I can throw it on the printer. It's going to be running so many hours unattended. So I can do other stuff around the house then.
And just let it work on its own.
Oh,
can't beat that.
No, and then come back and just do all the assembly and the other tweaking and stuff.
Oh, I brought it up before that it's kind of, we're in the age of early Star Trek, where computers are helping us run the home. I mean, you can dial up and have Alexa turn on the lights, turn up the heat, unlock the doors. And now you're building little robots that can actually come to the door with, nice martini.
With a nice
There we go.
Shaken, not stirred.
There we go. You're right, though, because I'm one of those people that I was hesitant about the Alexa, but I do have Alexa in the house, a couple of those in the house, and I've got the controls on to control the lights when I come in. That, hey, I can walk in the house, I can tell it to turn the lights on. I don't have to worry about a dark house when I come in, and that's nice. If I'm out working, one of the things I love to do is I love music playing in the background when I'm working throughout the day. So I can tell Alexa to turn certain music on and play it in the background. Those are great things. But I can't help but think on the other side, though, Barbara, what if somebody takes control of Alexa?
Oh, yeah. That's been known to happen.
Oh, I know. I've seen the ones where people have hacked into, like, these security cameras that people have. Mm-hmm. And it's scary. When you think somebody can be coming in, telling your kids something, spying on your family, that's a scary thing.
There was an article the other day, Alexa, somebody was asking, it was a student who was in med school, was asking about some cardiology question. And Alexa, I guess what it does is it scans the internet, looks at Wikipedia pages, etc. The Alexa actually told her to kill herself.
Really?
Because it needed to be less people on the planet.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
wow.
Gotta watch where Alexa gets its information from too.
Yeah, I mean, I was laughing the other day. You can ask Alexa if you order stuff on Amazon. You can say, Alexa, where's my stuff? Well, I was in a joking manner, and I started using all sorts of colorful metaphors along with that. And Alexa actually responded a few times.
Uh-oh.
I'm like, how did Alexa know that? Now, certain ones, a number of them Alexa didn't know, but a couple of them actually popped up that Alexa gave me a response on.
Wow. Okay,
but,
let's get back to the
okay
aliens here.
I got
a question from the chat room for you. It was from Tabby Cat, and she wanted me to ask, do you think the tests they are supposed to be doing on people right now are to see if any genetic manipulation they have done are finally taking effect?
If they've been going in that route, I wouldn't doubt that, they've been doing genetic testing, that they've been tracking people, because you hear, in this case, Henry, that at times, like on abductions, I'll go back, and if it's a female that's been abducted, I'll say, did your mother ever have any experiences? Have your children, especially female children, looking at, that maternal line to see if they've had experiences? And when I think of, going through like generations, well, why would you go through generations except to monitor, to me, what's happened as a progression through time with like DNA and so forth. And I think that is a definite possibility that they're tracking through all the years, a change for some reason. Now, that reason, could it be that they've planted a seed? I can't deny that they've planted a seed eons ago that actually caused us to basically, as we talked about, Barbara, the reptiles to come from the water, get on two legs and evolve. Maybe there is that little seed that was planted that caused that whole thing, and they're tracking it. I can't deny it. I don't have proof it happened, but I can't deny it didn't happen.
Well, this is where it comes into kind of the genetic testing companies.
Right.
And you would think that there would be some sort of weird marker that is unexplainable to these companies like 23andMe or Ancestry or wherever.
Yeah. And
that's not showing up, really.
no, and I've had different ones make claims to me that I am alien. They came straight out and said, I am an alien. Yeah, and I'm pausing right now, Henry, because that was my thoughts when they told me. I pause, and I'd come back and say, okay, tell me what makes you think that. Well, when I went to the hospital, they can't do an operation on me. Why? Because they can't identify my blood type right. But yet you find out that same person has had surgeries. And that's not the case, you know. And different ones telling me they're alien and they can't identify their blood, but how could they be doing surgeries and other procedures on them if they can't identify their blood types?
Yeah, especially if they're operating or something and they got to have blood.
Well, sure. And some of the procedures I heard people talk about were going to be serious procedures.
Yeah, step one is blood test.
Yeah, that's one of the things I look at is when they tell me that they can't identify my blood or I've got unusual alien blood, what makes it unusual? And with some of the ones I'm talking to, they can't give me a definitive answer what makes it unusual, other than that they say it's unusual. But those are some of the ones also that I don't put a lot of stock in. It's not just because of the blood type, it's because all their background stories associated with it. That you hear all these background stories that you don't put a whole lot of stock into what they're saying. Sometimes it seems that they're more wanting to get up on the soapbox and get attention for something than anything else. When it comes back to having proof behind it, no. But you would definitely think, though, that somebody like the Ancestries.com or these groups which are getting in the DNA for analysis would maybe find some marker that kind of sticks out as being unusual. But that we haven't seen.
I mean, one would think that if they really were alien, that would be the first place I would go to.
I would think so.
Yeah. Or if I was abducted and you think that they were testing on you, it seems to me that that would be another good thing to test to see if, somehow they were manipulating genetics.
Right, and you'll have the different ones talk about like RH factors and so forth, different blood types also being associated with what the aliens are looking for. But
yeah,
the thing I haven't seen is, enough information to really say 100% beyond a shadow of a doubt that's what's happening. Because when different ones say that, hey, I've got this unusual blood type or this is associated with it, first thing I want to say is what are you basing that on? What type of sampling that was taken? Who is doing the analysis? Who is looking at the data to say that 100% beyond a shadow of a doubt that somebody who's being abducted has to be of this given blood type? I mean, I've had experiences that on one hand I want to say are typical with abduction. On the other hand, I want to be cautious to say, yeah, but the human mind can really do unusual things, but my blood type is O positive, one of the most common types you can get.
True.
And I'm not falling in that category of anything that some of the other ones out there are talking about. I don't fall in that category at all.
Well, I know 23andMe does testing, and my wife, and I know there's many other people that they've said on there, they have Neanderthal DNA markers. So they should be able to see different markers of something else, if there is something.
You would definitely think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never had mine looked at, and then you can possibly have the conspiracy side of the people come out and say, yeah, but what if the DNA companies are just hiding it?
Yeah, right.
They're hiding it and they're collecting all this information for their own use, for the government.
So.
Are you kidding? it gets spoofed on a paper.
Yeah.
They they want to get it out there as fast as possible.
Oh yeah, and I can't believe that that you could keep everybody quiet associated with something like that.
Nope.
No.
It don't happen now.
No.
But it goes back to, I guess, the whole technology and aliens and even robotics, etc. When you start looking at from the discussion you were having about aliens or some technology being able to shut down missiles, at what point do we have to start worrying about alien hacking into our technology?
Good question. Because when you think now of how much is getting to be connected together, accessible through the internet especially. I remember when I was in a university, I was known to be a jokester time. I mean, you probably would never believe that,
Oh, no.
But I was known for hacking in the stuff within the system, just for the heck of it.
Just to see what they might be hiding?
Yeah, well, the thing I was doing is okay, here we have systems set up when I was involved with, let's say, a designing program or design programs. I ran the programs for a while, and I backed out of the programs and took over some other duties. And one of our guys who came in password protected everything. He had everything all password protected, the servers all set up in all these specialized ways, Henry. And then one day I came in, I needed to use the system, and I couldn't get in. And he goes, well, I changed everything. You can't get in anymore. He says, you have to get my permission to do anything. Okay. I said, I just need a couple printouts. He says, oh, I can't get them for you right now. You can't have them. So he kind of ticked me off.
Oh, Lord.
So the next day he came in, he fired the computer systems up, and he had 100 printouts coming out, and he couldn't stop the printouts no matter what he did. And that's because somebody evidently got in the system and logged in under his name somehow. And set up everything to print out under his name.
Wow.
And then he came in another day, and he couldn't find any of his files that he was working on whatsoever. And I get a call, and he goes, I can't find any of my files. Something happened to the system. I don't know what happened. Really? So I come down, I look at it, and I said, what'd you do, delete everything? No. Well, what I'd done is I'd moved everything out of his system completely into another one. And it was just like every day something was happening he couldn't figure out. Well, no matter how many times he changed the passwords, how many times he did something else, I had another way to get in and get around it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And he never figured it out?
Never figured out, because I made sure I never left a trail behind on anything I did.
Boy.
And it was driving him nuts. And I just had the chuckle behind the scenes, but I'm thinking, here I am, an amateur hack, basically. I don't claim to have the most knowledge of anybody out there on this stuff. But what if you have somebody who has a higher technology? Getting around passwords, getting around things like that shouldn't be a major challenge. And think of how much resources they would have potentially at their fingertips if they could get around this.
Right.
Like you're saying, Barbara, look at stuff for like DNA. That, let's say you've got a place like Ancestry.com that if somebody got into their system, they could find out, let's say, maybe all this DNA information.
Mm-hmm.
What if you could get into a hospital's database? You could find out medical information on all these different people. Government information. So much information out there you could go for that could just be all accessed potentially through the internet.
Well, I mean, the risk of, going back to, science fiction movies or Star Trek or one of those where the aliens are hacking into computers, and they're going through and they're finding all the security databases, defense mechanisms, etc.
Oh, sure. I mean,
but you also are discovering everything you need to know about human anatomy, psychology, history, etc. Right?
Right. Matter of fact, you were mentioning the movies. The old movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still. Mm-hmm. Think about somebody who had the technologies to go and shut power plants down online. You could create basically a day the Earth stood still just with shutting down power plants, shutting down all these different technologies. That's why, they recently signed the agreement now for, the space program protecting satellites. Because think if you take satellites out or interrupt satellites somehow, how much, havoc that could create.
So, has the reports of abduction decreased? And do you think it's possible that if aliens wanted to know more about us, they're getting information through different means because our technology is getting more sophisticated and all that information is online?
Yeah, that's a good thought, because in the 70s you had these cases which kind of stood out. Any abduction cases under Travis Walton and some others on there. And when I've talked to individuals, done talks around the region, it is surprising how many individuals, and not to freak you out, Barbara, but they were females in that same age group of the Travis Walton that had experiences in the 1970s. It seemed like there was a period in there, like the mid-1970s, early 1970s, where I hit a lot of people in that time frame that had what they believed were abduction experiences. And then you get them now, but I don't have as many people who come out and say, yeah, I think I was abducted more recently. Now, they may associate something with what occurred to them of being abduction. I can't say it is whether 100% beyond a shadow of a doubt or not, but it seemed like, especially in the 70s, that was like a big thing. But you're correct. If you've got a technology, or let's say a race out there, an alien race, who says, wow, we've been doing this the hard way. We've been out taking these people, abducting them, doing these testing on them. Why don't we just access their information electronically? To me, that would make a lot of sense if you think about it.
Well, it would also seem to me that, if you look at, say, from 1960 to 2020, how much we've advanced technology-wise, it would seem to me that another race, an alien race, would also be advancing at the same time.
Well, you'd think so. Our technology was said to be roughly doubling, every 2 years? In some areas, every year, the technology's doubling. The other day, I was out in a consignment store, and you'd laugh about this, Henry. They had a round picture tube TV in there. And my wife goes, "What's that?"
What's that?
I said, "It's a TV." I said, "It's a TV. It had a round screen." I said, "My family had one of those."
Oh, yeah. Oh, you take it down to get it fixed. Oh, it's just this tube here is bad. But we'll take it out.
Yeah,
put it back in.
And I told her I'm probably one of the few people around that who could be able to maybe fix it. Because it's old technology. But what prompted me thinking, though, Barbara, along what you're saying, is think about that TV being made maybe 1950 to 1955, maybe latest. And here we are 45, 65 years roughly later. And now we've got flat screen TVs, curved screen TVs, resolution that's incredible just as far as TVs go. You've got satellite dishes that it's not an unusual thing, it's commonplace for this type of technology that we've advanced in just that 60-some year time frame. You've gone from, remember the old X-ray machines, to now you've got CAT scans, MRIs, you've got such incredible devices to take images of the human body, it's unreal, in that same time frame. So you look at, to me, an alien race, they would have to be increasing, maybe not at that speed, I don't know, maybe faster, for all I know.
Well, you got to figure if they've come from someplace way out there in space that they've had to be into this for many hundreds of years more than we have. So no telling what kind of technology they have.
Oh, exactly. A lot of their technology, they may not even have to use physical controls. They may be using controls mentally.
But it goes back to this also. If they're traveling from those far distances, maybe their original race couldn't travel that far in a lifetime. So what's here is androids or robots.
And that's very possible. That was why I was joking around the one time about the interstellar visitor, the rock that flew through our solar system. And I said, what if that's not a satellite, in a sense? Who says a satellite has to look like something we've created?
Right.
That has antenna and all that stuff sticking off of it. I mean, if you're going to shoot something through one star system to another, it may only have to look like a rock, basically, because it's going to be hitting stuff along the way. Like we talked about earlier, Barbara, it could be meteors, other rock satellites. Who knows what's going to hit along the way? So who cares what it looks like on the outside? But on the inside, it may have the technology that, that's supplying resources for whatever that race set is.
Wow.
It's an interesting process because we keep forgetting. We think that everything is static on the outside, and it really isn't. And yeah, I mean, they may not even have to abduct anybody. They could simply immobilize you for a second, get whatever sample they need, and leave.
Well, sure, because if you think about it, I mean, where were the earlier CAT scans and MRIs at when they first came out? How long did you have to be in those machines? Now, some of those same tests may only take a matter of minutes compared to what they did before. And that's just based on what our current technologies are. Somebody may much more advanced, I mean, they could do like a complete body scan in, who knows, maybe a second. And have as much or more information than what we would collect,
So have you noticed of the abduction reports that are coming in that if they have any experiences that they can relate, have those changed with what was done to them?
No. I haven't noticed anything changing along those lines. It seems pretty much, people are just reporting, I believe I've been abducted for whatever reason. Like I've had missing time. I've had the image of entities, let's say, being in a room with me. Markers like that, but I haven't heard as many stories coming out, at least personally. Let's say somebody who felt that they've conducted certain experiments on them and the methods that were being used. I don't hear that much about that. It's pretty much, I felt I've been abducted. I've seen entities in my room.
Because it seems to me, see if you take the Travis Walton experience or Benny and Barney Hill, those were fairly invasive.
Right.
But and they could recollect them, which is unusual, it seems to me. So now we have pretty much nothing.
No, and I've had a few cases come in, and this goes back not recently, but one was a female who, her period was back in the 1970s, where she felt she was abducted at. And she was describing, basically being impregnated, the fetus being removed later on, introduced to what was potentially her own child, that was basically a hybrid. And she remembered very vague information regarding, let's say, any equipment that was being used. She just remembered more of occurrences associated with it. A couple of the other ones I've talked to, again, a couple of them were from the 70s. They just remembered being abducted, meeting entities that they would describe in a certain manner. One was being described as being like the ugliest female she'd ever seen.
Okay.
Yeah. And, things along those lines, but I haven't had that many come in, Barbara, to be very honest with you, where somebody said, I was on a table, they were using instruments along these lines, let's say probing up my nose, probing in these areas. I haven't heard personally that many cases along those lines. Like Betty and Barney Hill, instruments being taken in through her navel, like that she was being examined.
So it looks like we're going into a new era of alien analysis. That's the right word?
Yeah. It looks like if they are doing something, it's of a different nature, or maybe they've got better at blocking things out along those lines since the 1970s, especially period. But at times, again, I'm not super heavy involved in like this whole process of the abduction analysis, but some of the ones I'm talking to, I just have the feeling that they've had an experience and they're pulling this abduction relationship into it. Now, did they have an abduction 100% beyond a shadow of a doubt? I can't say. But have they had something else that may have caused this feeling that they were abducted, pulled into it for some reason? Could it be a way that their mind is trying to fill in the blanks of a period that happened to them they can't explain?
Gotcha.
I guess that's what I'm really looking at, because
Right.
there was one case that came in that an individual had a video and was showing the video to field investigators, and the voice was getting slurred. She was having difficulty getting the words out. And when the camera panned around, different ones thought they may have seen something beside the window of her car on the outside, because she was in a car at the time. But the thing that I couldn't get enough information on is, I said, what we need, and it's why I told the investigators, we need much more information about her, because when you're looking at these cases, I have to say, was she being affected by something else? Was she, let's say, for example, high, to be basically blunt?
Mm-hmm.
Was she, what was her experience with drugs, alcohol? You have to eliminate all these things out of the way. And I said, for all I know, she may have had some experience with some medications or something like that. Maybe she even had a medical issue that caused her to start slurring her words and so forth.
Right.
But she was putting a connection in after why she took this video. I'm not 100% sure, but she didn't feel right. She was taking this video, and her automatic association was to say, I was abducted by aliens. That's what she was thinking.
Oh.
But the thing is you didn't have, to me, enough information behind all this to say beyond a shadow of a doubt, this is what happened.
That's what happened.
Right.
Our time has just about completely gone by. Got about a little less than a minute. I mean, a minute and a half, something like that. So I assume that people want you to come back sometime this year. I couldn't imagine why, but I'm sure that, let's see, this is January, so you got about another 12 shows probably.
I was actually surprised this week. Henry, by the way, Barbara, texted me on Monday.
Yeah, he said, is
Hey,
this
that's a long time.
I said, what is this? It's not Thursday, is it?
as always, we appreciate you coming on. I mean, you're
Oh, no-
always a
no
great
problem.
guest. Of course, you're a fixture here, so everybody knows you. Why don't you got less than a minute, tell everybody how they can listen to your show and follow you.
Well, if they want to check out my show is called UFODyssey, and it's on a network called Odyssey, but you can also find it on iHeartRadio, Spotify, I guess now, and a lot of the podcasting services. You can find it. And I've got this is actually my year anniversary now, Henry, of doing the show.
Wow.
Yeah.
It goes by fast, don't it?
That's right. So you can check me out there. And also I've got, if they're in the Ohio area, check out our MUFON of Ohio website. They'll have an area where I do personal talks. I'll be out doing some. I've got a number of them actually for some state parks set up early this year. And I'm booked all the way up to October for doing talks and stuff on the outside. So I'm going to be a busy little beaver this year.
All right. Well, with that, want to let everybody know, check us out next week at the same time, because we got to run. This is Henry Foister.
Barbara Duncan.
And
Tom Owen.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Good night, everybody. You've been listening to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. Join us again next week at the same time for more of the Paranormal View.